Coming up next, the Holy Grail. On Beyond.
In this season of Beyond, we wanted to look at myths and legends, to look at the roots, to try to determine why a particular legend exists, and to discover if there are any paranormal connections that could give us fresh insight to our search. Myths and legends nearly always have the basic components: a social message, a moral or religious meaning, and some paranormal or superhuman element, which serves to focus our attention. Most religions are interwoven with legends, usually with an embroidery of a significant holy event. Moses' tablets of stone in the Ark of the Covenant, for example, have sparked a number of legends, which have the Ark traveling to Ethiopia, to the Knights Templar, and eventually to the Masons in Scotland. The interesting thing about legends is that their influence often spills out over the boundary of religion from which they came. You don't have to be Hebrew to believe in the power of the Ark of the Covenant, for example. One of the most significant and complex legends to evolve out of Christianity is that of the Holy Grail, a legend that seems to be more reality than fiction, and one which has arguably led to one of the greatest controversies in Western culture. The legend of the Grail has gathered momentum over recent years and points to shadows that cross over and roam through our world from the realms beyond.
Holy Grail, chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper. Grail, Holy Grail, Sangral. Grail, a cup or plate that according to medieval legend was used by Jesus at the Last Supper, and that later became the object of many chivalrous quests, also called Holy Grail, often Grail, the object of a prolonged endeavor. Middle English Grail, from Old French Graal, from medieval Latin gradlis, flat dish. Sangral, Sangral. Sang, blood, real, rail, royal, sang, real, blood, royal. When it comes to the Holy Grail, nothing is certain. It is not even agreed whether the Grail is the bowl from the Last Supper or the wine cup that was used for the sponge to give Christ some wine whilst he was on the cross. It was said to have the power to heal all wounds. The quest for the Holy Grail makes up an important segment of the Arturian cycle. The legend may be a combination of genuine Christian lore with the Celtic myth of a cauldron endowed with special powers. It was said to have been brought to Britain and later became the object of knightly quests. Only those godly enough, noble enough, and those with a true heart were said to be worthy of finding the Grail. In the mainstream, this is the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. In post-biblical traditions, Joseph of Arimathea is said to have taken the cup and collected some of the blood of Jesus from the cross. Then there was a twist in the legend that has taken place over the last 30 years. The twist being that the French term Saint Grail is in fact not one word but two, sang and real, meaning blood royal. Esoterics believe the Holy Grail means royal blood and refers to the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Yes, and there's scholars that say that Mary Magdalene would have been she would have been the one that was the principal, that he was closer with her, and the other apostles, many of them were jealous of her and said, how come you're giving her more attention than you're giving us? And he's saying, well, she's who she is and you are who you are, and she has more the spirit of what we're, and that she was seen as much closer in both her own knowledge and closer personally to him, and she would have been the one. And maybe they did marry and have kids together somewhere. So that's not ruled out.
They bring out this whole idea that Jesus had a child by Mary Magdalene, who then went over to Europe and grew up there, and there are descendants of Jesus who were part of different royal families in Europe. All the way through the creation then, there is this maleness and femaleness which are coming together all the time. And it may be that in that passage, I'm not quite sure, but there seems to be a reflection of that idea of the maleness and the femaleness, and when you bring the two of them together, then you have completion of some sort. Once you try keeping them up, and this would be very important too, keep the men and the women apart and you have no children for one thing, but at the same time, keep them apart within your fellowship and you have no creativity, keep them apart in your church and you have no validity within your church because you have nothing creative within it. All of you, in a sense, the male is sterile, because male in this tradition is just idea. The female is power, and the power has no direction without the idea. So you have to bring the two of them together if you're going to have any kind of creativity. And I think, within Jesus' teaching, he included women all the time, which is kind of interesting, because in the Jewish context of that time, women were pretty well excluded. Okay, so this is quite revolutionary. And it seems to be that within Jesus' message, there is this idea of the bringing together of the male and female force, because that gives you creativity and completion. So there's another gospel, it's the partial gospel, it's the gospel of Mary Magdalene, which should have been in there. And in that gospel, Mary Magdalene, after the resurrection, she's there with the disciples, and she's telling the disciples, she's saying, the Lord appeared to me and he said such and such and gave me these teachings. And then the whole part of the teachings is missing from the text. Somebody took that out. You don't know what the teachings are. And then in that particular gospel, there's the statement that Jesus used to kiss her often on the mouth, which suggests a very close relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which of course has been wiped out of the other texts.
So let's examine these three grails and see what we have. First, let's look at the beginning of the legend. It was said that Joseph of Arimathea traveled to Glastonbury in England following the death of Jesus.
I mean, they say Joseph of Arimathea was a merchant, and a tin merchant, I think.
Glastonbury is in the heart of Avalon, being the romantic land of King Arthur, from which comes the most famous version of the Grail legend. It was the notion that love was a sacred thing and that it was of God. With King Arthur, for example, his loving queen Guinevere falls in love with Arthur's best friend and most loyal knight, Sir Lancelot. Even though neither wished to hurt Arthur or bring about the resulting end of Camelot, they are unable to control their love and calamity ensues. These stories, told or sung by balladeers, ignited the imagination of the lower classes all over Europe. Some historians believe that this was the spark which triggered important changes, such as the signing of Magna Carta, which led to the French Revolution and the American War of Independence. Now, the third and most recent version of the Holy Grail is perhaps the most controversial of all and involves one of the most mysterious religious orders in history, the Knights Templar. This order was a law unto itself, an order of warrior monks most feared throughout the world for their skills in battle.
And these weren't just soldiers, these were commandos, these were the elite. The story of the Battle of Bannockburn goes that the Brits turned back when they saw riders coming across the field with white mantles and red crosses.
Yet there were also master builders, masons, code makers, spies, priests, and the first international banking system in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, and why 9 knights for 9 years were all there were, and yet their job was to guard the road to Jerusalem. They had their hands full, I would say.
Knights Templar obviously found something very important in Jerusalem. They weren't there, as they said, to guard pilgrims. They didn't have enough personnel to guard pilgrims. They were there excavating, and they found something. What they found, of course, we don't know, but it gave them tremendous power within the European sphere of influence. They became a sort of a completely independent organization that, but they weren't subject to the laws of any land, they weren't subject to the laws of the church. They could do anything they wanted. So whatever it was they had was very, very powerful.
Nine knights traveled to see the Pope in the 12th century and amazingly obtained an audience with him within 2 weeks, which was unheard of for people of such low significance.
Obviously, they were, the people that set that up were people in power already to negotiate with Rome to get those things.
Even more stunning was that they left that audience with a charter to form their own order with autonomous powers previously unheard of in the church.
It would seem they were looking for something. Were they looking for the same secrets that Masonry is looking for? Possibly so.
Add to this the legend that they were keepers of the Holy Grail and keepers of the Ark of the Covenant. As if all this were not enough, they were also rumored to be keepers of some awful or terrible secret.
It would certainly seem that way, yeah.
Almost 2 centuries after the inception of the Templars, the Pope ordered the immediate dissolution of the Knights Templar Order. As their French leader, Jacques de Molay, was burnt at the stake for heresy, he proclaimed that the Pope would be dead within 6 days. He was.
Some people say whatever it was taken up into Scotland, and that it's somehow in Rosslyn Chapel. But because the Templars were supposed to be gotten rid of, they transformed it into a Masonic lodge so that they could hide the traditions, so that the Templar traditions were carried into Scottish Masonry anyway.
In 1306, Jacques Bruce de Molay was burned at the stake. The Knights Templar did have an extensive navy at the time, probably the biggest and best in the world other than possibly China. And it disappeared. Shortly thereafter, pirates appeared who were well educated, they knew how to navigate, and they used the skull and bone sign. Kind of interesting.
The acclaimed bestseller, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, offers remarkable detective work that suggests the terrible secret, in fact, redefines the story of Christ.
What do you think of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the notion of the Magdalene
Personally?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, love the story.
Yeah.
I think that it's got a lot of truth there, for sure.
It would seem that the great Templar secret was that the Holy Grail, Sang Grail, was in fact Sang Raal, meaning blood royal. That the bloodline of Christ was in fact the real Grail.
Nothing in the literature or any of the ceremonies that I've been involved in or seen talk about that particular thing at all. It's almost like what I've seen of Masonic ceremonies is that they predate Christianity. And it's almost like, again, Christianity was kind of incorporated into the Masonic system as it went along. Probably because most of the Masons of that time period were of so-called Christian countries. And so it might have a certain Christian flavor to it, and yet it really isn't Christian. It would seem to be much older, and many of the stories and legends are definitely older. And I'm almost astonished from time to time when I'll see a ceremony that's done that I, as a child growing up in a Christian home, thought, oh, that was a Christian ceremony. That was created by the Christ. Well, no, it was something that he borrowed from something much older and meant the same thing as the way he used it. So where did he learn these things?
When the Inquisition finally got rid of them, they came up with all kinds of stories of what was there. But they came up with one story was that the Templars worshipped somebody called Baphomet. And it's not clear what Baphomet is, but there is it's like a code that the Jews used to use. It was called Ashbat cipher, I think it was. And if you apply that cipher to the word Baphomet, you get the word Sophia. Now, Sophia is the feminine aspect of the divine. Sophia is wisdom. Sophia is also the power of the divine. Okay? Now, it would seem that now, and if you carry that a little bit further, there's a whole tradition that Mary Magdalene represented Sophia. And Mary Magdalene, then the union of Mary Magdalene and Jesus is the union of, I mean, in this mystical tradition, is the union of the male aspect of the divine and the female aspect of the divine, which of course would be tremendously heretical at the time, so they had to keep it very, very secret. Now, what they found in Jerusalem, nobody knows. I mean, it could be the treasures, it could be the Ark of the Covenant. It's great for television shows because you could come up with all kinds of theories. But whatever it was gave them tremendous power, and also seems to have been centered around something to do with this business of the feminine and the masculine aspects of God, which of course was finally very threatening to a church which was based on male dominance, male priesthood, putting down women, saying women, I mean, some of the Roman Catholic writers said women were created by the devil to tempt men and that kind of thing. Now, if you take this idea, which seems to come out of the Templars, that women and men should be equal, which also goes back to Jesus' idea of women and men should be equal, that's a tremendous threat to this kind of authoritarian church. And of course, they had to be gotten rid of.
The notion was drawn from Templar symbology that Christ did not die on the cross, but rather left Palestine with Mary Magdalene as his wife, and that his descendants, the blood royal, ended up in the south of France. In fact, this was borne out by the Dead Sea Scrolls, which tell of a great master who faked a crucifixion using death-inducing drugs similar to those used in voodoo zombie poison. The famous Templar symbol of the skull and crossbones is believed to be the symbol of Christ's natural death.
Most of the things in Masonry are not very deeply veiled, and a skull and bones looks like somebody who's dead. And of course they mark tombs with it, gravestones. Masonries, even to this day, would possibly think about putting a skull and crossbones on the tombstone. I certainly would. It seems very fitting, and that's what it's for. You know, it's to mark the impermanence of life, but death in particular, death of a human.
But consider this. The Arturian notion of the Grail being a symbol of destructive yet divine love may surely be a statement which relates to the forbidden love between Christ and Mary. It would seem that this secret has changed the world in so many ways, from the revolution of love in the Middle Ages to even shadow governments in our contemporary world, which deeply involves the Freemasons, but also the darker, far more sinister clandestine Masons.
We have seen how the religion of Christianity as we know it has been brought into question, how the early Romans used a new religion to save their empire, how dozens of Gospels excluded from the Bible told very different stories of people like Judas and Mary Magdalene, even scrolls that exist suggesting Christ did not in fact die on the cross. In this episode, we have explored how different legends of the Holy Grail tell that Jesus and Mary Magdalene may have established a bloodline that eventually led to the creation of the Knights Templar, and how that shaped a new world order. A new order and even more secrets will be exposed during the Mason episode. As we started on the research for the Da Vinci Code, we found ourselves peeling back layers of truth and reality that exposed new possible truths, which redefined over 12 legendary religious events. Events pointing towards international conspiracies and shadow rulers. The truth is complex and compelling, and shows us that although the Da Vinci Code may be fictional, real events inspired it, and are still very real forces that guide our society, and may even have engineered bloodless coups in the most powerful nations in the world. In the next episode of Beyond.